Not everybody can be an impact player, but a team also needs role players to succeed. And some Jets rookies could fill valuable roles. We'll talk about who they are and which roles they could fill today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Monday, May 5th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today, we're going to talk about Jets rookies. And in particular, we're going to talk about Jets rookies who could grow into quality role players. Now, of course, the Jets would love for everybody they drafted and everybody they signed in undrafted free agency to develop into star level players. Short of that, they'd love for all of these guys to become quality starters. But of course, that's not realistic. And in reality, winning teams also need quality role players, guys who maybe aren't starters, guys who maybe don't see a huge snap count, but play important roles on a football team. And while every player the Jets drafted and every player they signed as a UDFA will not ultimately be a valuable role player, there are a number of guys who at least have the potential to be. And we're going to talk about who some of them are. We're going to talk about potential special teams role players. We're going to talk about potential defensive role players. But let's start by talking about potential offensive role players. And we'll begin by discussing the pick, which if you've been listening to the show over the last week, you've heard me criticize quite a bit. And that was the pick the Jets made it in the fourth round, Arian Smith, the wide receiver out of Georgia. Now, I think Arian Smith's biggest critic would tell you that he is a guy with absolutely blazing speed. And I do see the Jets carving out a role for him in this offense as a rookie. I mean, I think if you watched him at Georgia, he was kind of a limited player as a wide receiver. I mean, he was really kind of a deep ball specialist who did not produce all that much until his final year. So, look, the Jets may use him as a deep ball specialist. I think it's difficult to make a living in the NFL if all you can do is run a vertical route, at least as a wide receiver. But I do see opportunities for the Jets to utilize his speed in other ways, and that's the kind of manufacture touches for him. We've seen teams find players like this, and they utilize them on plays to design plays to get the ball to them in space. A quick screen to them on the outside, an end around, a jet sweep where the guy gets ahead of steam. You hand him the ball, and he's tough to bring down. It adds an extra element. If that guy goes in motion, defenses have to account for him. These are not guys who make a huge impact, but they're guys the defense has to account for. And I think one of the big issues with the Jets on offense last year, it's an issue nobody really talked about, was the lack of home run ability the offense had. I mean, you had Breece Hall at running back who kind of struggled with hitting the home run. He kind of took a step back from where he was in 2023 and 2022. He was not producing big plays at the same level as he was his first 2 years in the league. And after that, I mean, occasionally you'd get a splash play from Devontae Adams, but there really wasn't much explosion elsewhere. There wasn't much explosion at the tight end position with Tyler Conklin. Garrett Wilson's a heck of a receiver, but he's not a home run hitter. So a guy like Arian Smith, if you can design touches for him in a creative way, and part of this is going to go to Tanner Engstrand, because it's easy to say get the guy touches in space. It's another thing to actually design touches in space that will be effective, that put him in a good position. And I think that's one of the tests of an offensive coordinator is, can you get guys with speed like Arian Smith has the ball in fortuitous situations where he can make big plays? Jets need to hit home runs, and Arian Smith certainly could be a guy who could help them on that path. And on the same note, there was a guy the Jets signed an undrafted free agency. He's a running back out of Michigan, Donovan Edwards. A guy who a couple of years ago looked like he was going to be drafted and probably could have been drafted pretty high and did not really end his college career on a high note. Now, Donovan Edwards is not a lock to make the team. I don't think any undrafted free agent is. I do see a path for him. Now, I think what makes it tricky for Donovan Edwards is the Jets have three backs that they like. They like Breece Hall, they like Braylon Allen, they like Isaiah Davis. And that's not conjecture. Aaron Glenn was speaking about them a few weeks back. He said, we're going to have a three-headed rotation at the running back position. It would have been very easy for Aaron Glenn to say, we love Breece Hall. Aaron Glenn didn't say that. Aaron Glenn said, we're going to have a three-headed rotation at the running back position, which indicates Jets are going to give all three guys some touches. And that really limits the path to the roster for a player like Donovan Edwards, because you would think the Jets may not keep more than 4 running backs. So those 3 guys are already guaranteed. And in another world, I don't think recent day 3 picks like Allen and especially Davis would be guaranteed roster spots unless the coaching staff was really impressed with them, especially Davis, who was a 5th round pick. Because the new coaching staff has no loyalty to these guys. But the fact that Glenn singled these guys out and said that the Jets like them, that's a sign that they're staying. And there's really only 1 spot left. And what complicates this further is Jets have a return guy, Kene Ngwangu, who may make the team on the basis of his return ability. Now, the case for Ngwangu is that he had a huge game against Seattle, a game I was actually at Thanksgiving weekend, where he broke off a big return for a touchdown. But he's a running back. So if Ngwangu makes the team, then there may not be a spot for Donovan Edwards. Now, the thing with Donovan Edwards is another guy who's a home run hitter. A running back who isn't great at reading blocks, to be honest with you, but guy who can make explosive plays, a guy who had a track record for making explosive plays at Michigan, a guy who was not consistent on a play-to-play basis, but had the ability to hit the home run. Will Donovan Edwards ever be a lead back in this league? I mean, anything's possible. Players can always surprise you. Players can always develop on a trajectory you're not expecting, but I kind of doubt it. Can Donovan Edwards be a guy who maybe you give the ball to occasionally to try and strike lightning? Is he a guy whose receiving skills you could utilize? Perhaps. I don't think he'll play a big role in the Jets offense, but sometimes you need a little lightning in there. Could he be a guy who maybe gets a couple touches a game, add some speed, add some big playability? I don't think it's inconceivable. I wouldn't, I certainly would not bet on him doing that, but I think I could see a scenario where it could happen. And that's really what you're looking for out of a UDFA. And then the third player I'm going to mention is somebody who now stands to have a good chance to take the Jordan Travis developmental quarterback role, and that's Brady Cook. And get your jokes out about get your lame jokes out about how the Jets have a Brady playing quarterback. I'm sure plenty of people have made that observation. Cook's undrafted free agent, like an undrafted free agent quarterback. The odds are against him. A couple things I like about him, though. I like his profile that he's a multi-year starter. I do think that starting experience at the quarterback position is important. I think that getting the opportunity to play at game speed, playing, seeing defensive looks, getting experience. I think that stuff matters. And, I think that he's a guy who's at least flashed some ability to read a defense, to get the ball where it needs to go. I think it's not probably between him and Adrian Martinez for the third spot. Adrian Martinez doesn't add a whole lot as a passer. I think if you're looking to maximize the QB3 position, the QB3 role, maybe you keep Martinez, because Martinez can at least add some elements with his legs. But if you're looking for somebody who has a better shot at developing into a long-term backup, Brady Cook might be your guy, because again, he's run an offense in college, and he's at least shown more ability as a passer than Martinez has. So this is a guy who could be in the running for a QB3 role, and your QB3 is really about developmental. It's really about developing. It's really about getting him ready for the future. And if you're an undrafted free agent, we're not even going to conceive of the idea that he could be a long-term starter. The question is, could he develop into a backup? Odds are against him. Look, odds are against any undrafted free agent. Is it conceivable, though? I think it might be. There's an outside shot maybe for Brady Cook, and I think his path is certainly clearer now with Jordan Travis out of the picture. Now, during the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the defensive side of the ball. There are a couple players who could emerge as core backups, 2 late-round picks and 1 undrafted free agent who may just carve out a role on this team. We'll talk about who they are and why that is as we continue here on this Monday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Upwork. Scaling your business requires the right expertise at the right time. With Upwork, you can find specialized freelancers in marketing, development, design, and more, experts ready to help you take your business to the next level. Upwork gives business flexibility by connecting them with top freelance talent across multiple industries, including IT, AI, web development, and marketing. Whether you need extra hands for a project or a long-term partner, Upwork makes hiring simple and affordable. If you need help with a marketing campaign, Upwork can help you connect with a freelance expert who delivers incredible results. Posting a job is free and simple, and within a day with multiple qualified candidates to choose from. Instead of hiring full-time, Upwork helps find affordable, top-tier freelancers to scale your business effectively. Visit Upwork.com right now and post your job for free. That's UPWORK.com, Upwork.com, to connect with top talent and grow your business today. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day, and a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today we're talking about Jets rookies who could fill roles for the team. Not everybody can be a starter. Not everyone can be a star. Sometimes you need role players to contribute, whether they see a handful of manufactured touches or they're just backups or rotational players on the defensive side of the ball. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. We're going to talk about the defenders the Jets drafted on day 3, and then one undrafted free agent who could potentially end up filling a role for this team. I'm going to start off by talking about the defensive line. The Jets' last pick was Tyler Barron, a defensive end out of Miami. And look, anything's possible. I could be wrong in this analysis, but if you're tuning into the show, I'm guessing you're somewhat interested in my analysis. And I think most likely, if everything clicks for Tyler Barron, he's probably like a quality 4th defensive end on your team, quality like 4th edge guy. And what you're looking for in a 4th edge guy is a guy who can play a handful of snaps. Your 4th edge guys, he'll see the field, he'll be active on game day, but he's really only going to play when like everybody else needs a rest. So if you need a guy who can handle a handful of snaps a game, and I feel like that's the most likely scenario for Tyler Barron if it all clicks for him. I feel like he's the kind of guy who might be able to handle a handful of snaps, but if you put him out there any longer, he'll get exposed. And what do I mean by that? Well, I use an analogy with baseball. If you're a baseball fan, you know that there are starting pitchers and there are relief pitchers. And starting pitchers obviously spend more time playing than relief pitchers because starting pitchers go deeper into games. Relief pitchers tend to not be on the pitching mound for very long. And there's a reason for that. If you're a relief pitcher, you really only need one quality pitch to make a career for yourself in baseball. Because if you have a good pitch, you can get guys out with it. If you're a starting pitcher, you're going to face guys 2, maybe 3 times in a single game. If you only have one good pitch, you might be able to get them out the first time, but guys in the major leagues will be able to adjust. And if you show them the same pitch a second time, they're going to hit it out of the park. So you need at least 2, maybe 3 pitches to succeed as a starting pitcher because it may take them in the bat, but they'll figure out that first pitch. Then you got to move on to the second pitch. And that's kind of the same thing with like defensive ends. You may have one really good move and you can use that move. And if you're only playing a handful of snaps, you'll have success with it. If you have to play longer, though, and you only have that one move, offensive tackles are going to figure that out. So you got to have multiple moves. I think Tyler Barron, the guy's kind of limited. I think he's decent with utilizing his hands to shed blocks. He's pretty stout at the point of attack. I don't think he's like super athletic though. So I think like maybe he tops out. He tops out as like a 4th defensive end. Look, a 4th defensive end is somebody you need on your team. You're going to have some snaps that are going to go to him each game. So if he's got a limited skill set but can succeed in that limited skill set, then maybe it can work out for him. Staying on the defensive line, let's talk about an undrafted rookie. He's out of West Virginia, Fatorma Mulba, and this is a guy who has been a quality run defender through much of his career. He's shown an ability to get off blocks and make plays to shut down the run game. Look, the Jets' defensive tackle spot is obviously not very good or very deep beyond Quinnen Williams. I mean, it's essentially Quinnen Williams carrying the entire load for that group. I don't think the Jets made very effective signings this offseason in free agency. They did not draft a defensive tackle this year, and I felt like that was a bit of an odd thing. Now, the guy I really wanted was Mason Graham, who was not available to them. Cleveland snatched him at 5. But in a year where one of the few deep positions was defensive tackle, and the Jets clearly could have used an upgrade there, I thought it was a bit odd that they did not even grab a developmental guy at any point in the draft. But they did sign a couple of guys as undrafted free agents. Fatorma Mulba is the guy I have my eyes on again because he's been a good run defender through much of his career. Now, how much can you really expect a UDFA defensive tackle to succeed? I don't know. He's obviously a guy who faces uphill odds to make the roster, but I think if we're being honest, an area where the Jets really struggle up the middle right now, especially on the defensive line, is in run defense. So if Mulba's a guy who can, give you anything at all. Maybe he can do this year's Leonard Taylor, where he makes the team and is able to carve out a small role. And look, again, like defensive line depth matters, because defensive linemen who are active on game day are typically going to see a handful of snaps. So your expectation is not that this guy's going to be Quinnen Williams. It's not that he's going to see an extremely high snap count. The hope is that he'll be able to do enough in a limited role that he won't get exposed. I think it's possible. Like, I'm not going to guarantee it. I think the odds are against anybody who's a UDFA, but I can see a path for Faturma Mulba to make the team and carve out some sort of role. It can be this year's kind of Leonard Taylor. And the third guy is the guy who gets drafted in the 5th round, Francisco Mauignoa out of Miami. And I've kind of talked about Mauignoa over the last week. He's a guy who, again, like, maybe I'm wrong on this, I see him topping out as a backup. I think like he's very physically limited, and that's going to be the thing that prevents him from being more than a backup. He's not particularly athletic. He's kind of undersized, but he kind of has a nose for the football. He kind of knows how to get to the ball. I was pretty impressed with his instincts. And linebacker is a very instinctual position. You have to know where to be. If you know where to be, it does make up to some degree for lack of natural physical ability. And the Jets don't really have anybody behind Jamie Sherwood and Quincy Williams right now. So the path to like be the third linebacker, the path to like actually carve out some sort of role is there. And in today's NFL, your third linebacker is not really a starter. Your third off-ball linebacker, at least, is not really a starter. He's more of a situational player. If you're playing against heavy packages, you're playing against like 2 tight end sets or a two back one tight end set on the offensive side of the ball, then your third linebacker can get on the field. And your third linebacker is also your primary backup at the position. So if somebody gets injured, he goes into the game. That's actually how the role Jamie Sherwood began last year as. And of course, CJ Mosley struggled to stay on the field. Sherwood ended up succeeding, winning the team MVP award, and then being rewarded with a lucrative contract during the offseason. I would not have those expectations for Mauignoa. The Jets have good linebackers in Sherwood and Williams. I'm not sure Mauignoa has starting potential. Maybe I'm wrong. Again, like sometimes the instincts can overrule the physical attributes, but I do think like a guy without physical attributes who's got good instincts could potentially be a good backup and could potentially be a core special teamer down the line. And speaking of special teams, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to close out the show. We're going to talk about the players the Jets got who could be good special teamers. And this is really a path for unheralded rookies to contribute, because most starting spots on the offensive and defensive sides of the ball are pretty much set. But special teams, there's always a revolving door. And if you can carve out a role there's a real path to playing time. I think there are 3 players who could end up playing big roles for the Jets on special teams. I'll tell you who they are as we continue here on this Monday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Monday. We're talking about Jets rookies who may not be stars or even starters, but guys who may end up playing a role for the team in 2025. And I'm going to close out the show by talking about special teams. And this is the clearest path to guys who are like bottom of the roster type players to make an impact, because the Jets offensive line is pretty much set right now. So if you're a guy the Jets signed as an undrafted free agent on the offensive line, you're not starting. If you're a guy the Jets signed at corner, you're not starting. Even the 3rd round pick the Jets took at corner is not starting unless there's an injury. But special teams, there's always kind of a revolving cast, and there's a real opportunity to get on the field. There's a real opportunity to see playing time. The first guy I'm going to talk about is somebody I mentioned in the first segment. It's Arian Smith. And, for a pick that I did not love, I do see possible roles for Arian Smith. At the University of Georgia, he was an excellent gunner on special teams units. And, gunners essentially the guys who are lined up on the outside of the punt, and they run down the field to cover the punt. Over the last 2 seasons, where Arian Smith played a lot of gunner, Georgia gave up a combined less than 30 yards in punt returns over 2 seasons. So Arian Smith has a chance to be an excellent gunner. And I think his speed works there. If he has aggressiveness in the role, I think Jets will look to use him in that role immediately. And another guy the Jets I think will look to use in that role is an undrafted free agent they signed out of Florida, Jamarcus Weston. And Jamarcus Weston got $200,000 in guarantees, which is pretty high for an undrafted rookie. You don't have to guarantee anything to an undrafted rookie. You're really just trying to incentivize them. The more money a team gives a UDFA, the higher the odds the player is going to stick. And it's just the more money you guarantee a guy, the more you like him going in. And I really do think these preconceived notions play a role in the final roster decisions. A 7th round pick has a better chance of making the roster than an undrafted free agent. And that's because the teams invested more in him. The teams invested more in the 7th round pick because they believe in him more than the undrafted free agent. Well, a UDFA who gets a $200,000 guaranteed contract has a better shot of making it than a UDFA who gets no guarantees. Jamarcus Weston has a really fascinating profile if you haven't followed him. There aren't many guys you look at who are listed as a wide receiver / defensive end / safety / gunner on punt team. And you usually don't see a guy actually listed as a gunner on the punt team. Typically a player is listed with his natural position, and special teams are just kind of a bonus. I mean, even the Jets signed Justin Hardy 4 years ago from the Saints. He was listed as a corner. He was never going to play corner for the Jets unless there was like an emergency. There was literally like no other corners on the roster. Irv Charles, a guy who's a core special teamer for the Jets. He's listed as a wide receiver. He's never going to play wide receiver for the Jets unless there's like a million injuries and they have to put him out there. But Jamarcus Weston on a number of sites has been listed as a gunner. And and his college coach, Billy Napier, has talked about how valuable he was for the Florida Gators in that role. In fact, Florida tried to use his athleticism all over the field. Again, this was a guy who saw time at wide receiver and defensive end at safety in college. He never found a role. So I think expectations for him to play on offense or defense have to be pretty low. I don't think he's a guy who would ever see the field in anything other than emergency, much as the same way Irv Charles would never see the field as a wide receiver, or Justin Hardy would never see the field as corner unless there was an emergency. But there's something there. I mean, look, the talk from Florida was all about how this guy was going to find an NFL team to sign him just based on his special teams work. A guy who had 5 tackles on special teams in the role of gunner, guy who by all accounts is one of the top gunners in college football. And look, I know like people are going to laugh at this. I know people will mock me for my passion for special teams. But special teams matter, and especially on a team that has some questions on the offensive side of the ball. The ability to flip field position is going to be really important for the Jets. Those hidden yards can make a big difference. If you're pinning the other team deep and then your defense gets a 3 and out and your offense gets good field position, it's a big win for your offense, especially an offense that, again, has some challenges at the skill groups. So Jamarcus Weston could end up being a sneaky good signing for the Jets. I mean, him, Arian Smith, Irv Charles, Jets may have excellent punt coverage this coming season. It could be 2 valuable rookies on those return teams. And the third guy who I think has a decent shot. I mean, I don't know that he's necessarily got the inside track, but that's Caden Davis. That's a kicker the Jets signed out of Mississippi. And if you're looking for a spot where a UDFA can actually stick on a roster, it's kicker, because most kickers aren't drafted. Most kickers are UDFAs. And Dave Davis again kicked in the SEC at Ole Miss, and we know that the Jets had struggles with the kicker role last year. Greg Zuerlein in particular. Greg Zuerlein's still on the roster. Jets also brought in a veteran, Anders Carlson, over the course of the offseason. So it could be a 3-way kicking competition between Zuerlein, Carlson, and Davis. Now, one thing I will say is I would not rule out Greg Zuerlein bouncing back this year. It's pretty common for kickers to just stink one year and then bounce back. You throw one little thing off with a kicker and you ruin everything. I mean, one little mechanical thing can send a kick from the middle of the goalpost to far wide left or far wide right. And Greg Zuerlein, was kicking through an injury last year. And the kicking, the performance of kickers is random anyway. I mean, it's like you have one bad streak, it can completely destroy your season. So I would not rule out Greg Zuerlein bouncing back, but based on the season he had last year, and based on the fact the Jets brought in 2 kickers this offseason, I can't guarantee you Greg Zuerlein's going to be back as the kicker in 2025. And someone like Caden Davis, he'll have an opportunity, and he may not win the job, but with the expanded practice squads these days, you have far more spots in the practice squad than you did in the past. I think it makes sense to use one of those spots on a backup kicker. In case something happens to your regular guy, you want someone who's already in the building, somebody who's worked with your holder and your long snapper. Because those, again, that's one of those things that's kind of underrated. The connection between the long snapper, the holder, and the kicker. If they're not on the same page, it can really mess things up. And it's difficult to like learn these things on the fly. So having your backup kicker in the building practicing with you, it matters. And even if Carlson or Zorline wins the job, Caden Davis may end up being the backup kicker. And if you have an injury during the season, well, we know that like your backup kicker can win or lose your games. So Caden Davis is another guy I have my eye on who I think could conceivably carve out a role on this team. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoyed the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube, enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out, helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.